Happy Arts in Our Schools Month. My name is Quanice Floyd, and I am the Executive Director of Arts Education in Maryland Schools, also known as AIMS. AIMS is committed to ensuring that all students in the state of Maryland have access to high-quality arts education by mobilizing power to communities through advocacy programs, professional leadership programs, and resource building and sharing. This month, AIMS is celebrating Arts in Our Schools Month with various activities and highlights of arts education and arts educators from around the state of Maryland. Every week, we will be hosting Facebook Live conversations with amazing artists, arts educators, education advocates, and policymakers. Please be sure to follow us on all social media platforms. Our username is ArtsEdMaryland, and use the hashtag ArtsInSchoolsMD and We All Deserve Arts to follow along and join in on the celebration. This week, we have an amazing panel of education advocates for our theme of arts education as a civil right. We have Frank Patinella from the Maryland ACLU, Shamoyia Gardiner from Strong Schools Maryland, and Rick Tyler from the Maryland Education Coalition. They will introduce themselves in just a minute, but I first want to say that I'm so excited to have Jannah Muhammad as our co-host for today's discussion. Jannah interned at AIMS last summer through the Bloomberg Arts Internship Program. Jannah, please feel free to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jannah Muhammad. I'm a senior at Western High School and hope to one day be able to work in the film and photography industry. Just like Ms. Quanice said, I started working with AIMS over the summer through the Bloomberg Arts Internship and was brought back to create a commercial video and co-host this panel. We now like each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Frank, Shamoyia, and then Rick. Please take 2 minutes to describe your work and your place in the education ecosystem.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's a really important event, and I feel very blessed being here. My name is Frank Patinella. I work as Senior Education Advocate for the ACLU of Maryland. Our work in education is rooted in the Bradford versus the Maryland State Board of Education lawsuit that was first filed in the mid-90s. In the lawsuit, we represented a class of plaintiffs who were Baltimore City parents and who contended that the state was violating its constitutional mandate of providing adequate funding for Baltimore schools. We won that lawsuit, and that led to the first commission, the Thornton Commission, and more funding, and then funding was cut by the state. And now we have a review of the funding formula for education. That's when they set up the Kirwan Commission. So we've been working on ensuring that the Kirwan Commission and the blueprint for Maryland's future, which is the bill based on the Kirwan's recommendation, includes adequate funding for all programming, including the arts. We mostly work at the state level during the legislative session on large issues, so funding and other issues that relate directly to systemic change for education. And we focus on children and families that have been traditionally underfunded, discriminated against. So these are Black and Brown students, immigrant groups, special education students. And we work with parent groups, student groups, to bring them to Annapolis in an effort to change the dynamics regarding who dominates the narrative on education reform. So thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shamoyia Gardiner, also very happy to be here. I'm Deputy Director at Strong Schools Maryland, where our mission is to create a world-class system of public education for every single student in the state. We were founded in 2016 in direct response to the formation of the Kirwan Commission, because our founders recognized that if the commission was allowed to continue its work the way things have always gone, folks wouldn't really get involved, and we would potentially miss a really great opportunity to make the recommendations that much better for our students. So the question about the place that we occupy in the education ecosystem is really critical. It's an important one to reflect on, because while we mobilize grassroots advocates across the country, we have team leaders in almost every jurisdiction in the state. We are also the folks who are lobbying legislators in Annapolis and taking that insider information and ensuring that everyday Marylanders have the tools they need to successfully advocate for the educational changes that we're seeking. So we are very, very proud of our recent victory. The legislative body just overrode Governor Hogan's veto of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which means billions of dollars of investment in our underfunded public schools over the course of the next 10 years. but also means that we've got new policies and programs like early childhood educational opportunities, the increasing racial diversity of our teachers and school leaders, more resources for students who would benefit from them, and new college and career readiness pathways, all wrapped up in governance and accountability, not only for our school systems, but for the state, ensuring that Maryland is doing what it is supposed to be doing for all of its students. So thanks very much for having us.
Rick, you're muted.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rick Tyler. I'm the chair of the Maryland Education Coalition, otherwise known as MEC. And we are a 40-year plus old organization that advocates for adequate, equitable education policies and funding, as well as systematic accountability throughout the public education system throughout the state of Maryland. We also are ones that work with and represent AIMS and ACLU and work with strong schools and a bunch of other outside partners, including the unions and the boards of ed, on ensuring that the highest quality public education programming and resources are provided to all students throughout the state of Maryland. I'm also a former music educator and married to a music educator, and there's a bunch of artists in my family. So the arts are part of something I do on a regular basis. So I'm glad to be here and participate in this event. Thank you.
Thank you all for that lovely introduction and, just kind of a lens to see what's going on in your world. And so I've met each and every single one of you on an individual basis with the work that we do at Ames. And so each of you had like a particular story around the arts. And so I would love, love, love for you all to share, your experience engaging or participating in the arts as during your youth, and then how have the arts shaped your life, and how do you think it shows up in the work that you all do as education advocates today? And anyone can go first.
Okay, I'll go first. Wow, I can go on and on about this, but I'll try to keep it brief. I remember when I was about 6 years old, I had this friend who moved into the neighborhood, and he went to my preschool. So I'd known him for a little bit, and he was taking piano lessons, and I would go over to his house and I would just noodle on the piano, and I realized that I could just play simple melodies that I knew. And then he started teaching me a little bit, how to use both of my hands. And I remember my mom came over to my friend's house one day to find me, and she saw me just sitting there playing the piano, and she's like, "Oh, wow, you're playing the piano. Do you want to do this?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, I want to do this." And they went out, my parents, and fortunate enough to get me a piano and lessons. And so that's when it started. And I played piano, from the age of 6 through high school, mostly classical, because that's, usually where you start. And, most of the teachers out there are teaching classical and learning how to read music and all. I picked up playing guitar in middle school, and I got a really crazy story that I probably can't share, probably inappropriate to share, in terms of how I got that guitar. Bottom line is I got that guitar, and I started learning chords and learning with, just a group of friends, middle school friends, and that continued through high school as well. Played in rock bands in high school. That was a lot of fun. When I got to college, and just, as a core message here and part of the story is that I would not have survived in elementary school or high school if I did not have music in my life and that outlet. I'm an introvert, just that way. I don't like to go out and talk about problems and my issues. I like to bang on the piano. I like to rock out, and just get in my own world. So it was really important for me, just emotionally and mentally, to have that. When I got to college, I majored in biology and pre-med, which was really strange. Man, my mom is from Thailand, and if you have an Asian parent, a lot of times you get forced into the medical world. That didn't go so well, obviously. Decided to become a social justice advocate. Um, but I also majored in music, and I kind of just took a lot of music courses without planning to major in it. But then I realized um, after my third year of college that I had way over the amount needed for a minor in music. So I'm like, oh, wow, I can just spend my final year and get a major. So I focused my last year in music, um, on theory and composition and jazz piano. And I started playing jazz when I first entered college, playing in the jazz ensemble and all, and learning that style, which I continue to play now. I also started learning traditional Irish flute. I also picked up the tenor banjo and started learning early traditional jazz that originated in New Orleans. So think Roaring Twenties music and Louis Armstrong. I've been doing that for about 15 years now. Still play jazz piano and for weddings and such. Had a great band not too long ago that was kind of a fusion hip hop with ambient kind of acid jazz type influences. And that was really fun until I decided to get married and have kids and could no longer um, do the bar circuit. I wrote and recorded a couple scores for short films that my friends worked on here locally. Um, and yeah, that's I mean, I still need it. I still play music all the time. um when I'm not at work, even now that I'm at work at home, if I need a break, I'm going to go sit down and play the piano for like 5 minutes, and that might be all I need to get my head in the right place. So yes, it's part of me. It will always be a part of me, and I'm just happy that I had the opportunity to be able to just have music in my life, and the people who I've met, and just feel very fortunate for having it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was amazing to learn that about Frank. I've worked with Frank over the past several years and just had no idea about those things. It's beautiful. What a great question. I'm originally from Miami. So the Art Deco style is what I grew up around. Arts are kind of embedded into society. And as a first generation American, my parents immigrated from Jamaica. I grew up in a house that was always blaring music. It was soca, it was calypso, it was reggae, it was my stepdad, freestyling on his own and trying to get me involved as well. It was family parties where everybody went to a certain place to dance, and after a certain time, the kids had to go to a separate room. So I find it difficult to call out one specific example of arts impacting my life. So we'll instead just breeze through a few. In elementary school, I went to a Title I public school, and the staff there were brilliant. It was a fantastic school. Two women who were probably at that time younger than I am now got together and decided to have a dance and drama program after school where we put on productions of The Wiz and did Christmas plays and things of that nature. And that actually ended up leading me to attend a performing arts magnet middle and high school. So in middle school, I danced a lot and learned a whole lot about modern and African dance and tap and jazz and the roots of ballet. I still tandu when I go places. People think I walk weird because I have that training. And when I went on to high school, even though that magnet program was based in science, I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to meet a man named Ray Dominguez through a creative writing class I took in 9th grade, who was a spoken word poet, totally changed my life, introduced me to other folks like Theo Castellanos, who is a stage performer and a director, and this organization called Tiger Tail Productions, which took high school students, taught them how to write and perform poetry, and let us travel to a different city for a week every year to hang out with a bunch of other teenagers and talk about the things that we wanted to see change in the world. I honestly think that Without those connections to arts early on, I wouldn't have had the inroads into advocacy and a lens through which to view myself and what is possible for my people. So I absolutely credit arts with where I am now and what I do. And just like Frank, when this gets stressful, I am turning on the music, I'm dancing with my ancestors and having a good time.
I've worked with both of them, and I've also learned some things. My granddaughter is a competitive dancer. She's only 9 years old, but she's doing real well. In fact, they have a big recital this weekend in Baltimore at the Royal Farms. Um, my story's a little bit different. Um, I'm also from Jamaica, Queens, New York. I do that sometimes. You can't find my accent. Um, I'm also a military brat. My father was a career decorated Marine. My mother was an educator, but when I was born, she stopped working as an educator. But prior to that time, this is her telling me, one of her last education jobs before I was born was she was the guidance counselor for Roberta Flack in Arlington. Um, I didn't know what that had to do with anything else, but I do know my parents played a lot of music when I was growing up, and it was always in my life. And what happened that we moved to Alexandria, Virginia, and I'm also a product of I went to 10 different schools the first 12 years of schooling, and I entered in sixth grade a school named Cora Kelly in Alexandria. And the first week they were looking for students that were interested in playing music, and some kind of way I got volunteered to audition, and I said I wanted to play drums. The next thing I knew, I bought my own drumsticks, and I went to class, and they gave me a trumpet. I'm gonna make this real quick. About 6 months later, I'm standing on the stage of the school auditorium playing a solo. Now I'm not sure how I got in 6 months from playing an instrument I didn't want to play to playing a solo in front of a whole bunch of PTA people, but that's what happened. Um, um, I found out pretty early on that I had a natural talent for music. Uh, the next year I went to middle school, but by the time I was halfway through middle school, I was playing with high school students and some of the bands you could audition with. And then I went to high school, and I happened to be in a city where every summer they send students away to a band camp for 2 weeks out on the West Virginia line. And when I was in seventh grade, between seventh and eighth grade, I went there for the first time, and I started playing with high school students, and I got introduced to stage band. By the time I came out of eighth grade, I met a man, we used to call him Pops Dean. He was an old jazz drummer in DC. And he invited me to play for a band he had organized with his sons and some of his sons' friends. Um, by the time I was 15, I started playing professionally. When I say professionally, I'm not just talking about around the city. I'm talking about all up and down the East Coast. Um, and still didn't figure out how I got there. Now, keep in mind, I'm originally trained classically, but by then I was playing top 40 jazz, soul, and classically through school, I was playing in orchestras, stage bands, marching bands, you name the music genre. I was exposed to it well before I got out of high school. And before I got out of high school, I started playing with some of the real professionals here in the Washington area, and some of the orchestras and musical plays and things like that, and did a lot of traveling. And because my parents really tried to get me out of music several times, and I didn't know at the time that music was my outlet because I moved a lot. So I had a hard time attaching with friends, but with the music, I got exposed to a lot of people. They liked what I was doing. And so I stuck with it, even though I also stuck with school because, you know, when your mom's an educator, then you still have to do your schoolwork. And and then it came time for me to go to college. And what happened was that my father's a career Marine. And by this time, he's working the headquarters Marine Corps and he knew a lot of folks. And they tried to recruit me into the president's U.S. Marine Corps band. And they started when I was a junior and they went all the way through senior and almost the end of my senior year of high school. I almost signed up to be in that band. But to give you an idea of my age, the Vietnam War was going on, and I also grew up in Quantico, Virginia, and was in the Boy Scouts with the FBI and the Marines. And what they really wanted me to do was to be a sniper in Vietnam. But I didn't know that at the time, except the recruiter left the office and I saw the paperwork. So the short story on that was I never got to play for the president's band, but I couldn't go home and tell my father. So I went to my band director, who by that time was getting ready to be the chair of music for Howard University. And I said, you got to find me a college somewhere quick. And I ended up at Virginia State University in Petersburg, Virginia, where I majored in public education and music performance. And I went on to play for another 25 years all over, everywhere east of the Mississippi River. And I did very well, but I had the same problem Frank had. One day I came home from playing and not getting any sleep. My wife said, you haven't seen your kids in 12 days. And she said that the next week, 2 weeks later, you haven't seen your kids in 12 days. And I sort of know what that meant. I didn't want to hear what that meant. But eventually I slowed down and then I finally gave it up. But the good news is that my wife's a retired music educator, so I've never been completely out of music. And she's also a choir director now. And the kind of work that she does with the music, she's worked with MSD on curriculum writing, and she was actually one of the curriculum writers for the Reginald Lewis African American Museum. And so one way or the other, it's in me. Frank wants me to come out of retirement. That's going to be really hard, but I love the arts, and I will do anything to advocate for the arts because I believe it's essential to every child's education.
Wow, all your stories are very amazing. I can also relate, I used to be a very shy person and film really helped me express myself. And also not just that, like through my art programs, everybody there helped me really and open me up and come out my shell. So I'm really grateful to them. So right now, we're in the middle of the 2021 session of the Maryland General Assembly. What are you currently working on during this time?
I can start. A brief overview of the Strong Schools Maryland legislative priorities for this year can be described in three ways. One was override the veto of the blueprint. We're really successful, glad that we're done with that part. The second part is once the veto is overridden, we recognize there were a lot of other technical changes we needed to make to the blueprint. It was passed last year with the intention that the timeline would begin in last summer. Clearly that did not happen. Things have changed. There are now different needs that students and school communities have, some of which the blueprint is poised to address. And so we are currently working with legislators to draft legislation. We're calling it the Blueprint 2.0, very imaginative. And what the intention is to address all of those things that will be necessary for us to begin implementing the blueprint properly. Strong Schools Maryland also recognizes that the blueprint is not all of education policy. There are so many other issues out there that we need to be working on and lending our support to. So our final legislative priority is COVID-19 response for educational equity. And here we're working on things like supporting legislation to offer telehealth for school-based health centers, many of which have to go online. And for students for whom the school was the primary source of their healthcare, this pandemic has been pretty horrific. So we're very happy to be supporting bits of legislation strengthen the structural integrity of our education system and make the blueprints implementation that much more smooth.
Yeah, we're also working on issues related to Blueprint 2.0, and mostly hoping for and advocating for the funding to be looked at again. It's another opportunity to ensure that when you start phasing in billions of dollars, especially in the early years, that the districts that are most underfunded and the students who are need the most resources get them in the early years. We're also working with Rick, and I'm sure you're going to talk about the Comar amendment that we want to get passed, the Senate Bill 915, but this relates directly to the arts, right? And we're working with you, Quanice, on this. But right, Comar requires what? A music teacher, visual art, dance, theater, computer media arts, right? And there's barely any of that, I know, in Baltimore City schools, right? So we want to make sure that Comar and these regulations that took a lot of expertise and time developing from advocates and state officials and all, that they get implemented, right? And that there's an expectation that these programs will be implemented at the school. Another really interesting bill that we're working on, and this is something new for the ACLU, but working with the Baltimore Algebra Project and Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle on a bill that would set up another commission on multicultural education. So looking at the curriculum and providing a framework and content for multicultural education. There's also a bill that would set up a commission on African-American history as it relates to the curriculum. And so we're working with both of those bills. We're hoping that one commission comes out of this, and it would be a really great opportunity for the community to engage and weigh in and find experts, people with expertise and all, to weigh in on how should the content of the curriculum change as it relates to multicultural education, African-American history. So that's really exciting. This is one thing that, the Kerwin bill, the Blueprint bill, it's mostly a resource bill, right? With a lot of funding and a lot of great programs, that we support, but it didn't look at these more, these other issues that are integral, right, to student learning. Black and brown children should be able to see themselves, should be able to, their lived experiences, their history, their culture should be centered in the curriculum. It should, and the lessons should resonate with them and serve to help build up their identities and affirm their lives. So I think that's an exciting opportunity. We're also working on a couple bills that relate to school discipline, making sure the state's collecting data on, suspensions and things related to promoting restorative approaches to discipline and behavioral infractions, and funding for school facilities, and the contentious issue of removing school police. I know not everyone perhaps on this call agrees with that, but the ACLU is supportive of removing school police and instead reinvesting those or redirecting those dollars to supports such as mental health supports, trauma-informed care, and restorative approaches. And I wanted to mention one other thing about the arts. I used to be a social worker in a high school in Baltimore City, and certain kids, would sit down with me and we would have conversations, and that worked for them. Other kids, it was difficult. It was hard for them to sit in front of me and just start talking. And I'm a lot like that as well. But what worked with a number of kids is I'd bring them over to the music room and I would just sit them at the piano. I wasn't really teaching them. I might give them a couple, like 3 notes. I'm like, here, hit these 3 notes and, try to feel the rhythm and do what you want with that. And it was a way for them to relax, right? And it changed their whole kind of, demeanor during that meeting, and I made a lot of progress with students that way. So in addition to, you know, just the regular arts education that we're advocating for, we should be thinking about the arts in this way as well, in terms of, you know, social emotional development, mental health needs, and the like. So thank you.
Rick, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Mecca's been very busy this General Assembly session. We actually started back in the fall because we were fairly confident that the blueprint would be overridden, but we wanted to look at what's next. What right after that's overridden, what needs to be looked at and what needs to be worked on. And then on top of that, we had the issues that were highlighted due to the pandemic and COVID. And so we broke up into a couple of subcommittees to begin looking at these issues. And we came up with about 6, and I think it eventually came up with 8 major issues. But some of them include we wanted to make sure that the budget was not penalized due to enrollment loss, because the statewide, 27,000 students did not enroll this year. And we knew that it may not harm the school districts that much this year, but we knew if everybody came back next year and the enrollment went back to at least where it was last year, that the school districts would have less money. And that would harm those school districts that had less wealth and less fewer options on how to adequately fund all the students in their school systems. The second thing we want to, and the second thing we're looking at is how does it impact their education, not just the arts, but overall. And you probably heard of a term called learning loss. We sort of have flipped that. We are aware about learning loss, but learning loss doesn't solve the issue. So we've been working and focusing on what we call learning recovery, which is what programs and what services would best suit students in order to close the gaps that has been created to not just the normal students that you think of that are often found in special needs and ELL and lower income students, but we believe it affects most all public school students throughout the state of Maryland. So we needed to find ways to close those gaps. So we've had a town hall meeting, and we've worked with legislators to begin addressing the learning gap. And then a smaller sector has been working on reading recovery and coming up with best practices for reading recovery that are not about remediation, but about acceleration to speed up the reading for our students. The biggest issue, and it's the most urgent issue over the next week for us probably, has to do with the COMA regulations, which are basically the rules that apply to all school districts on what they're supposed to teach all students. And within those regulations are regulations for the arts. It also covers a variety of other areas. It covers all the major subject areas, all the special student groups, from limited English and special needs to gifted and talented, homeless and foster care. And it also covers other parts of the operation of our schools. But Ames actually came to MEC about this issue last year, and we've been making some progress on it this year, because in the blueprint for Maryland's future, there's a clause in there that says performance standards. And we believe that's subject to interpretation. And we recognize that the performance standards already exist in the state of Maryland, and they're called the COMA regulations. And if people were aware of what the regulations actually were and what they actually said, and there's about approximately 50 of them, they would realize that not only are they evidence-based standards on what works, but that they would also, if fully implemented, would provide all students access to a well-rounded quality education. And so this next Tuesday on the 9th, there's a hearing for SB 915, which simply just asked the General Assembly to put some clarifying language in there instead of performance standards that was spelled out what the performance standards are. They are the COMAR regulations, which, by the way, are based on national, in some cases, international standards of what works for all kids. And I can tell you that in the arts, they worked on the regulations. These are not things that they come out of the sky and create. These are things that are worked on over several years. I believe the arts regulations that are current now, it took them about a decade to come up with the final outcomes. So I've worked on gifted and talented and the graduation standards and a few others. And I can tell you that when you sit down at a table with some of the best minds, not just in Maryland, but across the nation to develop these standards, you know that you have good quality work. So,
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Great. And so I just want to keep in mind that we are going until 5:30, and we're so glad that we have folks listening in and responding via our Facebook Live chat. But I do have a quick question. Hopefully, we can keep responses to 1 minute. And so we know that, right, we're talking about COMAR. So we know that the arts disciplines are listed within COMAR as a requirement for a well-rounded education. And so with that, we know that arts education is literally a right because that is one of the core subjects that our students should be getting in the state of Maryland. But in reality, as you all spoke earlier about, we know that there are students who do not have access to, all of the disciplines, and some schools don't have access to even one discipline. So with Blueprint now, the veto being overridden, how can we ensure that expanding access to arts education is a part of that rollout? And so if we can keep responses to about 1 minute, that'd be great. And anyone can go.
I mean, I think advocacy groups and community groups, in the broad sense, school communities and all, they need to advocate for it at the local level. After the blueprint starts, and we're going to see, we don't know exactly, how the money is going to be phased in and what programs are going to be prioritized or mandated based on the Blueprint 2.0 bill. So we're waiting to see that, and we should see it soon. But just overall, while the blueprint needed to be the veto needed to be overridden and the 2.0 needs to go forward, I have concern about whether this funding formula that's going to be in law is going to be adequate. It's going to meet the constitutional standard of providing students with adequate funding to meet that well-rounded education that Rick was talking about. So it's going to be advocacy. We just have to keep the pressure on. And with limited funding, school districts are going to prioritize resource for math and literacy. But I think one big issue that kind of gets pushed aside, the arts is kind of are thought of kind of as an afterthought, right? And that just the way the education framework has shifted over the past 20 or 30 years. It's all been towards high stakes testing. That's what districts are being held accountable to. They're not being held accounted for students learning how to play music or do art or dance or theater. We have to change that, right? There's more to measure, right, than just math and literacy. And I think there's quite a bit of research out there that shows that with the arts, with arts education in conjunction with the other things, it improves your math, it improves your reading, right? So we have to think about education more comprehensively. And we have to work together to change that narrative.
I love to answer. I love to answer this question, but there are administrators and politicians don't like my answer. The arts are one of the core subject areas in federal and state law, period. So that means every student has a right to access to the arts the same way they have access to science, math, reading, and PE, or any other subject area that they expect in their school. It should have equal, it should be on an equal playing field. There should be no reason for anybody to exclude the arts from a quality education. And this has been for years. The other thing is that the arts are the only um, um, subject area that interrelates with all other subject areas, whether it's math, science, reading. There's a direct parallel. My wife actually did some research on that, on the correlation between the arts and all other major subject areas. Um, the third thing Frank alluded to earlier, it has to do with social emotional issues. Um, I used to work in a special needs school for emotionally troubled students, and arts teach things like self-discipline, how to identify and manage your emotions, your behaviors, how to interact with other people, how to feel comfortable within your own skin, all these different things, because it allows you to express yourself in ways you can't express yourself if you're doing a calculus problem, for example. Um, that's a different kind of study. So it is not only a legal right, it is a civil right, because when you take away things that are required by law, then you're violating the rights of every student that does not have access.
I want to answer this question from more of a personal perspective, because I have been giving a lot of thought to this. Why is it that my arts teachers and my dance teachers don't get the same resources and attention and funding as my core subject teachers? And I think this is for a lot of reasons. Societally, first, right? We're in the United States. It's a bootstrapping mentality, and we, and by we I mean leaders, policymakers, and decision makers at these systemic levels, like to quantify things. We like to talk about the data, the numbers we can point to, the very specific examples. And what arts are, as you can tell by the many examples we've given, is something that can't be fit into a box like that. It can't be quantified. You can't take a standardized assessment and profit off of that standardized assessment and then also tell people how artistic they are. It's something that can't be categorized. And I think because of this, people in positions of power shy away from that because they don't know how to defend funding for arts, because we don't think a lot. We like to use the same talking points we were using 40 years ago when we were advocating on this very same issue. So that's the one thing. I think societally, we're not set up to just value arts in general. But then when you look at why public education was founded in this country, it was about assimilation. And I think that there was good or bad an opportunity to use the arts in general to help with assimilation and acculturation. But we don't do that. And I think another part of the reason is because we associate the arts with feelings, and we tend to associate feelings with women and vulnerability and femininity and all of these things that are not good and that are not strong in a lot of people's eyes. So as a result, just like we see the devaluing of certain teachers, and we see the devaluing of education as a profession because it's dominated by women, a lot of these implicit factors are potentially also impacting why it is that at the public school level, arts education is just not invested in when we know it yields so many positive impacts for students and schools.
It's it's an upward battle. Um, 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 People, I have a saying, people understand what they have experienced. So if they haven't had experiences in the arts, it's less likely they're going to understand them and accept the values of them. So,
Thank you. Yeah. Jannah, do you want to move forward with the next question?
Sure. A very important part of advocacy is communication. How do we effectively frame this issue to decision makers and the public so they understand the importance and urgency of ensuring that all students have access to arts education and are willing to do something about it?
And this kind of segues to what you said, Shamoyia, about how how people view the arts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing we have to be sure we're doing is making this opportunity to advocate accessible to people. And that means making government operations and these processes accessible and understandable. What happens once we pass a bill into a law? Does it, like, who does the work to make the thing go that we spent all this time and money advocating for? And I think if we can lay out the structure of state government, who is responsible for making decisions, when regulations are formed, what public comment periods look like and what it is to access these spaces, then we can see the outcomes that we want to see. And I say all that with the recognition that it shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't take someone to have to distill down what a process is. This is a civic process. These are laws that we are passing for the good. And I think that state leaders also have a role to play in ensuring that the work they're doing is accessible to the people they're doing it for.
And another thing is that, many of these programs and the research already exists. Frank alluded to some of the work that ACLU is working on a multicultural education and embedding that into the curriculum. Well, my wife happened to already work on that program through the Reginald Lewis Museum Project. That's what it was all about. It was tied to the opening of the museum in Inner Harbor in Baltimore. And it's supposed to be embedded in every school system in the state of Maryland as part of a K through 8 or K through 12 curriculum. However, it sounds like a lot of people aren't aware of it. My wife would be very disappointed because I know she worked very hard on it for about 2 years. So one of the things we have to do is find out what exists and what is it still relevant today, and whether we can bring it back up to the forefront instead of reinventing the wheel, and then finding people that will work with us to make sure that it's implemented everywhere it's supposed to be implemented.
I'm just going to say we got to go back to just the power dynamics and just the dynamics in general at all, overall at the state level and local levels, and how the narrative of education reform has really been, has shifted away from the arts and again, just more focused on, or just pretty much solely focused on math and literacy. And, there's a handful of legislators that are considered like the education, right, leaders in the General Assembly. When you talk to legislators and you have like a group of people, we talk about the arts and how important they are. The legislators will nod and shake their head. Yeah, but that doesn't change the narrative. So we have to be more intentional, I think, as advocates, and not let the state get away with, kind of just dictating, what education is going to look like based on commissioners that weren't chosen by us. If you think about the Kirwan commissioners, a lot of smart people, a lot of people with experience, but how many of them have ever have classroom experience in a school system like Baltimore City, in areas where there's been discrimination, redlining, total investment in those communities. We have to find a way as advocates to be better about and just more effective at organizing, helping grassroots organize, helping grassroots groups themselves get the resources, and what Shamoyia was saying, understand how the decisions are made and the whole process. That's not very accessible information, and getting funding to build up infrastructure in for a grassroots group is not easy, So I think, we have to hold ourselves accountable as advocates that have resources that and knowledge about these things, and commit to working with the grassroots, because this is a priority for them. I hear it everywhere. They want to be involved with arts and music. I mean, just think about if Baltimore City schools had, African dance and music and theater, the Latinx population had the same, this goes back to the curriculum thing that I was talking about earlier. These are things that help students understand themselves, build up healthy identities and all. We just have to put that up in the forefront, and we can't let commissions be formed and have a monopoly on what a global, whatever, or international high quality or world-class education looks like. right? Because I fear that what was done in the Blueprint Commission, like I said, there's going to be a lot of resources, a lot of great things, but I'm not confident that it's going to have all of these great art programs that are desperately needed. So we have to inject that into the conversation, into the narrative.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
can I very quickly add on to Frank's point? He triggered something great when he was talking, and it's the fact that it's not just this is AIMS, Arts Education Maryland Schools, not necessarily Arts Education Maryland curriculum. The Blueprint for Maryland's Future is going to vastly expand the number of community schools, which does include wraparound services and out-of-school time programming. There are amazing programs being run by individuals, community-based people all over the state that operate as summer school programs, like a Revolutionary Summer here in Baltimore City, or operate in school buildings after. And I just don't want us to overlook the value of those programs and also providing arts education while we are continuing the systemic struggle.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree. There are amazing arts organizations and arts partners and culturally centric organizations as well, that provide phenomenal arts education around the state. So thank you for bringing that into the space. And so just one sentence for this final question. And Shamoyia, you can go first since you were the last person to speak. Why is arts education a civil right? Just one sentence response.
I think civil rights recognize your humanity, and arts allow you to explore and develop your humanity, and be in touch with others. So the denial of that education is I believe, a denial of civil rights.
That was a run-on sentence, but I'll accept it. Frank, why is arts education a civil right?
What she said. And include the spiritual growth of an individual.
Awesome. Rick, why is arts education a civil right?
Bottom line is it's the law, and every student, regardless of where they come from, what they look like, how wealthy they are, how poor they are, has a right to have access to a well-rounded quality education. And if the arts are part of the core subject areas, then they should have the same thing regardless of where they live, whether it's in Baltimore, Montgomery County, or Worcester, or Caroline, or Allegheny. They all should have a quality arts education.
Awesome. And we just made it at 5:31. I just want to thank you all. This is a phenomenal conversation. So I want to thank you all for joining us this week. Thank you to Rick, Frank, Shamoyia, and Jannah. Anyone who's looking on Facebook or any of the groups that I vigorously posted in, thank you all so much. Again, please stay tuned for next week's discussion, which is going to be about the transformative power in the arts. It'll be the same time, same place on our Facebook page for Arts Education in Maryland Schools. Also, please be sure to follow us on social media, Arts Ed Maryland. We'll also put links into Shamoyia, Frank, and Rick's organizations so you all can follow them as well. And then on Thursdays, AIMS will be hosting an advocacy activity. So please look at our social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and join in on our activities so that we can continue to advocate for arts education in our schools. So thank you all so much. It's been amazing, and have a great rest of your evening.